is just really quickly on kind of like what are some very, very basic primitive coding best practices that we want to follow as developers. And the, for this particular like setup, the idea is these are things that if you don't do, your code will still work, right? Most computers don't care about proper syntax or good spacing. It will run the code as a series of ones and zeros. It will work. It will also be a complete nightmare for people who have to work on this code after you or with you. The So why write like good clean code? Really, like there's like the main reason for writing good clean code is because you're always going to be working with someone else on the code base, and more often than not, someone's going to need to work on your code after you're done with it. And so when you write good clean code for yourself, or when you write good clean code, you're most often writing it for other people. And I think if you do this long enough, you'll find that like other people also includes you like 6 months from now, or like a year from now, or like a week from now, because there's been plenty of times where I've looked at things that I've written like, oh my god, this is terrible. Like me looking at a few months later, like I don't understand what this does or why I did it this way. Um, Writing clean code just makes everyone's workflow a lot easier. It's definitely a lot faster for someone to look at your code and one, understand what it's doing, and two, figure out what's broken if it is indeed breaking. If you work with a developer, with someone else who looks at your code and is very malformed, one thing that a lot of developers do is they'll just spend time formatting your code for you first before they even look at it, right? Because they're like, I can't look at this if it's not set up in a correct syntax or a correct layout. And at that point, that's just kind of embarrassing, right? Because it does speak to a level of certain professionalism that you have, and respect you have about the work that you do, right? Like keeping your code clean and tidy to the extent that you can it's a sign of kind of professional maturity in a lot of engineering cultures. Um, so the first one, and we're only going to cover a few of these topics because once again, right, a lot of these are just kind of best practices as opposed to things that will break JavaScript if you don't do it right. Indentation is a big one, and really like the rule of thumb for indentation that I follow is if your thing is like open curly brace and it's only curly brace, like your next line should be indented. A lot of text editors might even indent for you because there's no reason why it shouldn't be indented. There's really no scenario in which you're going to have an open curly brace and your next line's not indented. Similarly, if your next line, or similarly, if your line is going to be a closed curly brace, it should be unindented, right? And so in this case, what you see is we actually form these blocks. And when I look at this block, for now at least, just kind of take my word for it, like this looks very clean, right? Because I know that for this amazing function, I know exactly where it starts and where it ends, right? Between lines 4 and 11. And the reason for that is because when I look at the indentation, this is all indented at the same level, right? This is kind of where it starts, over here in the first column, if you will, and here's where it ends. Similarly, when we look inside at this if loop here, right, between line 6 and line 9, once again, I know I can just take a quick look at this and know right away, hey, this if loop starts on line 6 and it ends on line 9 because, once again, it's indented at the same level, right? If everything was shifted way to the left and nothing was indented properly, it's hard to tell if this amazing function ends on line 9 or on line 11. Indentation kind of gets around that. And once again, it's just open curly brace, next line should be indented. Closed curly braces lines should be just de-indented by one. Brian?
Is there actual technical reason for that, or is it just to make it easier to read
It's probably so. Once again, like if you do indent properly, your code will run. So my gut says no. There's nothing like super special about indenting code properly. But for now, it just makes it a lot easier. In other languages, that's not the case. In other languages, indentation matters.
Okay.
In JavaScript, not so much because we're setting the scope with the curly braces, so there is a clear beginning and end. And in other languages, they assume based on spacing where your blocks start and end, so it's a little bit more. You need to be a little more precise. But for us, no. Like if this was just like all the way over here and this was like thrown way to the left, this code will still work the way you want it to, right? But someone looking at it is just very terrible. Like one joke that you hear pretty often is that like when you write code, imagine the next person reading it is someone who has really severe anger problems and knows where you live. And so you just always want to kind of do your best to make sure that you're paving a good road for those who come after you. Yeah. And then the other reason why indentation also is really good is when you see code, you see like a lot of cascading rows. And really like if I know, for example, when I look at this code, if I know that an amazing function is something that I don't care about, I can just skip everything between lines 4 through 11 because I know it doesn't really affect me, right? So when your code is indented properly, not only is it easier to debug and use, but also makes it easier for someone to actually know which parts of the code are relevant to what they're doing or what you're doing. So just do it. And usually, like when you guys share your answers to me on REPL, if it's not properly indented, I'll actually just spend the first like 30 seconds indenting the code so I can know, when I look at it, I know kind of what I'm looking at, right? Most code, when a developer looks at it, they assume is indented properly, right? They assume that you know how to do this and you've done it. So when you don't do it, it is kind of embarrassing. Or at least it is somewhat unprofessional for you to not indent your code properly. The second and kind of last topic we'll talk about in terms of best practice here is just variable naming. A few rules of thumbs here. Wow, they really okay. So variable naming. Once again, right? You can have very poorly named variables. JavaScript's not going to break. It's not going to yell at you. It will run, and it's great. You're just going to create a bigger headache for those who come after you. So JavaScript uses camel case, which means if you have a variable, usually the first letter is always lowercase. But if your variable name is not a compound word, if it's several words that you put together, you keep the first word, the first letter of the first word lowercase, and then every subsequent word you capitalize the first word, right? So in this case, my favorite place, the M is lowercase, but then the F in favorite and the P in place is going to be all uppercase. Try to use as descriptive names as possible. And the reason why is because sometimes when you're looking at like a piece of code, it's actually hard to tell what that variable is. Like if you only have one or two variables, maybe in your mind it's pretty easy. More often than not, as you write more and more complex stuff, you're going to have dozens of variables, and even for you when you're writing it, it just saves a lot of headache to have them properly named. Because ultimately, variable naming is just to have a replacement, right? Like you don't quote unquote need variables. You can pass the same thing over and over and over again to the same functions. But variables it's just a way to represent data in a more easily understood manner, and so we really should take that and kind of as far as possible. You'll see like things like line 5 a lot, even, and they are good in some cases, but not all cases. So for a lot of like practice, or for a lot of like kind of like live coding demos that I give, I might just do let A equals this, or let X equals this, or let Y equals this. And for us, for the purposes of a demo, it should be fine because we're using kind of throwaway code just to illustrate a single point. For your code, if you're writing a function that does something or that kind of has multiple steps, really try to avoid having these ambiguous or just unclear naming variables, because if you have something called, hey, let X equal 7, someone looks at your code and is like, okay, what's X, right? Like even when I see something like my favorite place, like that tells me like not only is it a favorite place, that's most likely a string, right? It shouldn't be a number, shouldn't be a boolean, shouldn't be whatever it is. Let X equals 68, like yeah, it will work, but once again, just not very clear. So much better something like let current temp, or let something more descriptive use it. Usually for the purposes of a loop, we use like things like let I or let X or let whatever it is. And the reason why is because in most loops, and we'll talk about loops tomorrow, I believe. The idea here is that we're creating this variable I here purely for the purpose of using it within the confines of this loop. So in some ways, it is like throwaway code. And also it's just kind of more acceptable behavior. So that's like one instance in which using kind of ambiguous variables are okay. And it's only for this iterative part of the loop, not inside the loop. Inside the loop, you should still use like very robust variable naming. But yeah, so just two really quick concepts. Nothing hard yet. Any questions on these best practices? Brian?
Yeah, sorry. Is there a specific reason for the formatting, uppercase, lowercase, or is there a backstory? Or is it just the way it is?
Yeah. Well, so if I read that, I know kind of where the words start. And usually, like if there's only one word, let's keep it lowercase. Uppercase. So there's a lot of convention in coding, things that people kind of assume. So when you have only one word in uppercase, usually it designates a class.
Okay.
Not, I don't think there's anything that enforces it, but usually it does. So when you see that, like when another developer sees it, they assume, oh, this is a class. But you're like, oh no, I just really poorly named this variable, right? So and then when something's all caps, usually it means it's like a constant or like something that shouldn't be changed. So there are kind of a lot of like kind of inferred conventions between JavaScript, but for the purposes of so that's why we don't capitalize the first letter here. But I think the capitalizing all these subsequent words, just when I read it, it's just very clear where the breaks are. And so like my favorite P lady, yeah. Julian, you have a word? Do you have a question or? Okay, cool.
In React, classes won't work if you don't have one start with an uppercase letter.
Yeah. So yeah, so like once you start using like certain libraries and stuff, like they'll be even more stringent on like, hey, I expect you to do this in this way. So look, I mean, there's no reason not to do this. So if you could just do it, like it just makes everyone's life a lot easier. It'll definitely kind of make your life a lot easier too. Yeah, Francisco.
Sometimes in for loops, like let's say I'm like looping through a string.
Yeah.
So it would be like, for I equals 0 and then I is less than string dot length.
Yeah.
But sometimes, or x is string dot length. Is it a good idea to, like, if I don't want to just say I is less than string dot length, and I want to make x string dot length just so it doesn't have to keep remembering what string dot length is all the time?
Yeah.
Is it okay to just make it x, or should I make it like, should I name it like it's saying there?
I think that's probably more of a subjective thing. What you're talking about is like, hey, let's just like not calculate the string length every single time I go through this loop, but let's like almost cache it somewhere. At that point, it might be nice to just make it a little bit more of a naming principle because it is a variable that you're creating, and people might see like a variable called string length, but they might not know where you're using it. And so if you call it x, it'd be even more ambiguous as to what it is and where you're using it. So once again, like code, it's very much of a subjective art form, right? Like how do you want to make it most presentable? How do you make it easy to read? Very much up to you. Any other questions? 10 minutes. We're good? All right, cool. So for the workshops for today, read through the instructions. I'll assign pairs. Once again, just so you know, most of the workshop problems, like the code will run, even if it's poorly formatted, even if it's like not clean code. But really, the goal here is just kind of really enforce on you this idea that like we really should be writing as clean of a code as possible. So